It's Friday morning, April 22nd. Yep, stupid shot yesterday. Um, did Borderlands cast yesterday. Matt Shoemaker was on there. Nuclear arms expert, PhD at King's College London. Great school. If you don't know about King's College, um, other than Ohio State, it's one of the better places to get a degree from. A little partial. Where's it back there? Um, but something interesting Sam and I kind of hit on was Putin talking that Russia now owns Mariupol, and I don't quite think he does. Um, it's really difficult to own and control a city of nearly 500,000 people. Um, I've been in Fallujah, I've been in Ramadi, I've been in Baghdad, on the boots on the ground, as a scout platoon leader, as a tank company commander. Um, that's hard. Um, by comparison, so Mariupol's just shy of 500 million, or I'm sorry, 500,000. 500 million would be tremendous. 500,000, right? But modern port city has super surface, subsurface terrain. Very very complex terrain. Right on the Sea of Azov. By comparison, Ramadi is 250, 60,000. Fallujah's about half that, right? Baghdad, obviously being a national capital, is well north of 1 million people. To say you could, if the U.S. would come out and say we control Fallujah, we control Ramadi. No, you talk to the guys who actually lived it on the ground. No, we didn't. We never did. We can control small areas of the city for a short duration, and that's what we could do. But then really define control. I'm not controlling what happens inside the houses, inside the buildings, inside the sewers. Like I can't control that. I can control a couple city blocks and make sure nothing leaves or enters that small section, right? So one comparison I made. So Mariupol's, it would take, by my estimate, a division to really, attempt to start locking that down. Specifically, the steel factory where the Azov Battalion and the Marine Brigade are holed up in. So it's way more complex than Putin coming out and stating that we own and control Mariupol. Well, no, you don't. So let me. Well, that's the wrong thing. Boom. Can we go there? How about if I get the map? Can I get to the map? Boy, this is not cooperating with me today. Okay. Woo! Boy. So let me pull up. This is just Google Maps. This is Mariupol. Alright. So this is the Avastal. That's our Azovstal. Jeez. Early. So this is where the Azov Battalion and the Marine Brigade are actually holed up in now, right? It's conducting a deliberate defense. So it comes all the way up in this northeast part. This is part of the complex, and then everything down here, as well as a significant coastline with the Sea of Azov here. So pretty large piece of land. It has supersurface, surface, subsurface structures. And you have to figure that these Ukrainian units have been in there for over 2 months now, basing their operations out of the steel factory. After 2 months, that number of soldiers is in there. They know the nooks and crannies of this place pretty darn well. So obviously Russia does not control the steel factory. But they're claiming they control the city. I find that pretty hard to believe because 2 days ago, Ukrainian units from Azov and the Marine Brigade departed the steel factory and came all the way down to this area here and rescued or extracted roughly 500 Ukrainian really like port security forces, right? So like port police, ports authority police, right? But to do that is an incredible operation. That's not simple. You just don't stroll down here. All reports are they did it over land. They didn't do it over sea. Over sea would be the easiest, right? But they came across. So how do you have to get there? They have to go here, right? They have to go across these bridges. That's tremendous, right? So to say Russia controls Mariupol when they allowed over 500 people, right? Because they not only have to get to the harbor, but you have to bring them back into the steel factory. They get 500 people plus over this bridge. You don't control Mariupol. If you did, you would have killed 500 Ukrainians right here at this choke point. All right, and obviously there's a couple other areas where they can cross, but that's the best. That's the most high speed. All right, look at that bridge. It's nice. All right, and not only do they have to cross that bridge, but they have to transit through the city. All right, down to the harbor. Load up 500 port authority police. Load them up. Get them organized in a convoy. Transit back through the route you just came through. And back into the steel factory. Don't tell me Russia controls the city. All right, Putin can't make that claim. You don't, right? Russia can control portions of the city for a limited duration. All right, because Azov and the Marine Brigade just demonstrated that they have a degree of freedom of maneuver in Mariupol. Period. They have a large degree of freedom of maneuver. All right. They have networks inside the city, so they know where Russians are, where Russian units are, their troop movements. They probably know their guard shift schedule. They know where their command posts are, right? So the Ukrainians have a lot of IPB, well-developed intel on the routine schedules, composition, disposition of Russians throughout the city that enables them to go out and conduct a pretty large operation. So, while, yeah, there are Russians in the city, they don't have absolute control, right? Absolute control is so difficult, especially in such a large city, right? This is, I'm in Northeast Ohio, so this is, it's bigger than Akron. It's Cleveland, right? This is Cleveland. That's pretty comparable. It has a coastline with Lake Erie, Sea of Azov, a large steel district like Cleveland has. So, imagine trying to control Cleveland with a foreign military. It's not going to go over well, right? Because I know plenty of people working the steel mills in Cleveland. They're not going to put up with that. So Russia doesn't truly control Mariupol. They're making a statement and attempting to message that they own Mariupol, right? And this messaging, what I believe comes back to is feeding a narrative that Russia is can reallocate combat power elsewhere. And consequently, Putin did state that they would not, as in Russia will not invade the steel factory, which is a really smart move because that would take significant combat power to get a brigade plus size element out of the steel factory, to destroy them, right? And to seize that facility, right? It's massive. This is it. I'm kind of drawing around it right now. All right? So that's what it looks like. Just to cordon off the ground access of that, is probably a 2-brigade operation. So, 6 to 7 BTGs, Russian equivalent. They need to cordon off the coast. And getting ships that close to shore is pretty sketchy, right? That's increasing the risk to the force the closer you bring any of your maritime assets that close to shore. They do have some littoral craft as well as 6 or 7 diesel subs that are in the Black Sea. So they do have some. Russia does have some capability to get things in close to the shore that are lower risk than a cruiser type platform, nuclear missile capable, right? Particularly the subs. But I'm not educated enough on what the Sea of Azov looks like right around Mariupol. It is a port, so there is some deeper water access in, right? But they would also have to allocate I believe a significant part of their Black Sea fleet to cordon the seaside, and then 6-7 BTGs just to cordon off on the ground, and potentially upwards of 12. You could easily double that number. And then if you're going to attack, that's going to require even more combat power. You're looking at a combined arms army worth of combat power from the Russians to eliminate Azov Battalion and the Marine Brigade who are in the steel factory in Mariupol. Right, so I don't think Russia's willing to commit that combat power. I don't think they have that combat power that's not already committed elsewhere along the front, and realize that front goes from all the way from Sumy, just southeast of Sumy in the northeast of Ukraine, all the way down through the Donbass and down to Mykolaiv. So it's a huge front Russia's trying to cover. And they're not going to allocate the combat power to Mariupol. And because of that, they want to go back and focus more in Luhansk and Donetsk. They're just going to control Mariupol, move 3 to 4 BTGs out of Mariupol and reallocate them back east. That's really what I see happening there. They're not going to own the city. There's 500,000 Ukrainians in Mariupol aren't going to allow Russia to own the city. Everything's going to be contested. Right? So just keep that in the back of your mind. What Putin says, vice what reality is going to look like on the ground, are two different things, right? And that's one thing I'm glad we never came out and said, like, we own Baghdad. Well, no, you don't, bro. There's a million Iraqis to tell you different. Even in 2003 when they were like, yay, Mr. George Bush, #1. No. All right. So I put together a couple charts. I don't even know what I'm doing today. Move my stupid face around. All right, but basically this is the move into the next phase. And I think we are distinct. I'm usually tactically I'm not a fan of phases, but operationally, strategically, I understand how phasing it has a purpose, and we are in that break in between phases right now. I don't think phase 2 of the Russian attack has truly begun, and on the Russian side it shouldn't. So I've kind of made two sides of the chart here. What Russia must do, what Ukraine must do, right? What Russia must do is red because they're Russia and they're the bad guys. Ukraine is surrounded in blue because they're good guys, and blue is Ukraine's color, right? So, all right, what must Russia do? Russia has to regenerate combat power. Up over 20,000 KIA, WIA, MIA. All right, that's equivalent to an American division gone. So they really have to regenerate combat power. All right, there's multiple ways to do this. Right, you can reorganize your units. Those are in contact, recently removed from contact in the northern part of Ukraine, moved up into Belarus, and then reallocated. And those units they finally made their way east. Right, but Russia needs to reorganize and reallocate personnel and equipment to bring units back up to an acceptable level. In the American Army, that would be 90% personnel, equipment, and readiness, right? So operational readiness rate, like 90% of your equipment works. 90% of your equipment is on hand, and 90% of your people, of your authorizations, are present, right? And healthy and ready to fight. Okay? Russia's also got to rebuild, right? Their industrial base needs to ramp up and pick up to rebuild combat power. Everything from 7.62 by 39 ammunition up through tanks and major end items and major components of T-72s and BMP-2s, BMP-3s, BRDMs. The supply chain has to start at the industrial base, and the industrial base in Russia is broken. Because that goes into the next two things, right? Resupply and rearm. You can't resupply or rearm your forces if the stuff doesn't exist. All right, so a huge part of regenerating combat power. I got to resupply. I have to rearm my forces. But the Russian industrial base is really hit hard by the sanctions. The sanctions are really look to be working on the capability and capacity of Russia's industrial base to provide the combat power. Okay, and the last thing I have under regenerate combat power is get the forces out of Belarus. Looks like they're out. Looks like they finally were able to get everything moved on the trains and moved out of Belarus into Russia and then around to the east, and now they're starting to commit that in the position, right? But that took Russia way too long. And rail operations are not easy, right? If you've served in the military and you've conducted a rail operation. It takes roughly a day to put a battalion on a rail. And it's dangerous. Rail operations are dangerous. Somebody's getting hurt. Especially in an army that doesn't have standards. The equipment's questionable. So what's the status of the rails in Belarus? In terms of maintenance. So it's a high risk operation, railing. So it did take Russia a long time. But it looks like they've got most everything out of Belarus now and committed back towards the east. All right, so regenerating combat power. They got to regenerate it because a lot of it's destroyed. So regenerate. Russia needs to do intelligence preparation of the battlefield. They haven't done this since the beginning. I don't think they're going to start doing it. But the first step is defining the battlefield environment, right? Defining what our area of operations is, what our area of interest is. All right? And they've never really done that. You can't have all of Ukraine as your area of operations. And the whole world as your area of interest. It's too much. And it doesn't allow you to focus and concentrate your combat power, your logistics, and your command and control at a decisive point, right? So Russia needs to narrow down defining the battlefield. I think they're getting there a little bit by saying, well, hey, the Donbass is really, the strategic aim. But really, really late to the game. And I still think Russia needs to hone in on that a little bit. Step 2, IPB. Describe the battlefield effects. Obviously, Russia has sucked at this. And it's crushed them. Because the terrain and weather analysis of Ukraine is really what caused a lot of Russia's hang-up in the north. They didn't understand the late winter, early spring weather in Ukraine and the effect of that weather on the terrain. And I think that's really what led to a lot of those, John Deere tractors coming out and towing away Russian tanks and supplying those to the Ukrainian army. So Russia has demonstrated an inability to understand terrain analysis, weather analysis, and the effects of terrain and weather on military operations. Because you really have to, right? It's like an ogre, right? We're building layers. Okay, so here's the terrain, here's the weather, here's the civilian population, here's the military, here's government structures, here's the international community, right? These are the layers we build in our IPB, right? That allow us to evaluate the threat and determine what the enemy is going to do, right? So we're looking at this from a Russian perspective. So we have to analyze and take in all these inputs to really, and I'm talking at higher levels, not so much tactically, all these inputs to how Ukraine is going to conduct military operations. So Russia really failed to do that, and I think they're going to continue to fail to do this because it's not inherent in their model. Okay? So their IPB is a failure. And I think it's going to continue to fail. Russia also needs to do a better job with their deep attack. Right? They're conducting deep attacks. They're conducting deep strike. But they're not doing it right. They're not doing it well. It seems haphazard, and it appears to me to be more of a reign of terror than actually accomplishing a military purpose. All right. So what they really need to do is attrit, neutralize, destroy Ukraine's capabilities. And the first thing I put on there is a cyber attack. Have we really seen Russian cyber electromagnetic spectrum offensive capabilities used in Ukraine yet? Not really. And that's the big surprise. I think that's the biggest, for me, that's the biggest surprise of all, given what they've previously demonstrated over the past decade of the new Russian method of conducting combat. So we haven't seen the cyber, we haven't seen the electromagnetic capabilities Russia has brought to bear in Ukraine. So that would be the first thing I would do if I were Russia, is to get those systems and those capabilities online and use those to start to shape the battlefield, right? And that goes in conjunction with a strategic bombing campaign, right? And your strategic bombing, unlike Curtis LeMay, I don't think it attacks the morale of the enemy. It attrits and neutralizes your enemy's capabilities in depth. And really, we're going after their industrial capabilities, right? Their military industrial complex capabilities. That's what I want to do with my strategic bombing. I need to take away their ability to supply, to rebuild, to resupply, to rearm. All right, that's how I look at it. It doesn't attack the morale. That was really been debunked. Next thing, using rotary wing deep strike in coordination with the cyber, in coordination with rocket artillery, and also special operations. Russia hasn't done this, right? Because this is hard. This requires coordination. It requires centralized command, but decentralized. I should decentralized command, but a centralized control of the operation. And you need to centralize some control because that it reduces the risk of fratricide on these deep strikes. But this is where I'm starting to go after Ukrainian units with a deep strike. All right, and I'm going after command and control, logistics, whether it's a depot, a support area, an installation. So that's what I'm going to use this capability for. And Russia really hasn't done it well. They haven't allocated the appropriate combat power, command and control structure, or synchronization. Right? And then my next echelon is using my cannon artillery, right, for that kind of intermediate fire in between. The last thing we really haven't seen Russia use is their reconnaissance in depth. And this is something, if you've served in the army over the past 70 years, you've trained to fight the Soviet horde, the Russian horde's reconnaissance in depth, right? So we've trained to identify and destroy the enemy's combat reconnaissance patrols, the CRP, right? Then they had the forward security element, right? Then the advanced guard main body, right? And this is something we always believe to be the doctrinal, method in which Russia conducts a reconnaissance, right? And it's an armed reconnaissance, it's a reconnaissance in force. But Russia hasn't really used this doctrine, all right, to gain and maintain contact with an enemy, to develop a situation, to get in my last point, what Russia must do is a main attack. All right? Russia's led with the main attack. I think where they got this idea from is from the Americans. All right? I think they tried to model their main attack off of the Thunder Run into Baghdad. All right, second week of April 2003. Right, 2nd Brigade, 3rd Infantry Division, just assaulted right into downtown Baghdad and stayed. So I think Russia was trying to model the attack on Kiev off of the Thunder Run, but it didn't work because everything's different. Ukraine is not Iraq. The conditions are different, right? And they didn't conduct the IPB. While it was a bold move by the Americans in 2003, The commanders and the staff in the 3rd Infantry Division understood the enemy they'd been fighting on the terrain and assessed the enemy and assessed own capabilities before conducting the Thunder Run. Right? It wasn't just like, hey, let's go do it, Leroy Jenkins. There was a deliberate thought process behind this. So I think Russia was trying to mimic the shock and awe, but they have a much different enemy, and they failed to describe and understand the terrain and weather, and they also didn't understand themselves, right? Which caused this attack to just fail. Russia doesn't use branches and sequels. All right, and this is something in the Borderlands cast we've talked about a lot, is the set battlefield of Russia, right? How it's not free play. It is set conditions. You will do this. You will do this. All right. It's choreographed. It's not built for subordinate commanders to make decisions that are based on changing dynamic conditions on the ground. So they don't have branches and sequels. They have the plan, and you execute the plan. Right? So they don't have the tactical and operational flexibility that's needed in the dynamic reality of a modern battlefield. Or not just any battlefield, right? It's a very rigid structure. It follows the plan, and that's really causing them a lot of trouble, right? Because they have not decentralized command, they have not decentralized control. It's all maintained at a strategic level, is where decision making is withheld. So that's crushing Russia. Last thing, I still look at those 3 BTGs in Transnistria, and I'm like, what are we doing? Russia's problem is they can't get them out now. Do they need to keep them there in Moldova and Transnistria to maintain control of that Russian separatist area? They probably do need them there as leverage. So I don't know. I'm not certain that Russia would be able to allocate that combat power, even if they are able to make headways and the set conditions for an attack on Odessa. I don't think those BTGs really are going to work in an attack on Odessa. I think Russia probably needs to keep them in Transnistria to keep Transnistria. All right. So there's what I think Russia must do. So flip it up on the other side, Ukraine. What must Ukraine do? Ukraine's got to reallocate combat power. They don't have to regenerate. They have to reallocate combat power. That's reorganize, resupply, rearm. And they have a massive international community effort that's helping with that. So the difficult task for Ukraine is going to be conducting training in and out of contact on some new equipment. And then they're also going to have to refit and regenerate some combat power with what's coming in from the international community. All right, so we're looking at like $1.6 trillion in equipment just from the United States. So 2.4 billion total. I said trillion. What do I think trillion? That's our national debt's like $4 trillion. But we're looking at about $2.5 billion in total just from the United States, right? Javelins, switchblades, armored vehicles coming in, Mi-17s out of Davis-Monthan that were originally going to Afghanistan, now going to Ukraine, CBRN equipment, body armor, helmets, Stinger missiles, right? So some of this requires training, some of it's just fielding, like a helmet. Put the helmet on your head, strap it on. I don't need to train you how to do that, right? Body armor, I don't need to train you. Put the dang thing on. Some armored vehicles will require some level of training. Javelins, Ukraine's already demonstrated proficiency with the Javelin, with a Stinger, with an in-law. Switchblade will require a little bit of training. But that's a kamikaze unmanned aerial system, like a little jokey Smurf thing. So that's kind of fun. Slovakia's bringing in S-300s. Ukraine's accustomed to that, so what Slovakia is going to provide is current equipment. So the training requirements are lessened because of that, right? Because it's mostly Eastern Bloc style type equipment, which really helps. So Ukraine's got to reallocate their combat power and really determine and define how they're going to establish along that eastern front and make sure combat power is apportioned appropriately. There is one concern I have. There's a little bulge into the Russian line there from Ukraine that's pretty dangerous because there's Ukrainian units in there that could easily be cut off if Russia finds a way to cut straight south, right? I think Ukraine has to refine their IPB. I think the first two steps they're pretty decent at. I think they need to hone in on evaluating the threat and the Russian COAs, and so I think that's where they need to focus a lot of their staff effort at division, brigade, battalion level, is to determine Russian courses of action all along the sector. And then that needs to get synchronized and understood by Ukrainian units all along, because I think Ukraine's big problem has been that synchronization above the battalion level. Once Ukraine starts to synchronize and understand what units to the left and right and rear are doing, they're going to become very dangerous to Russia, even more so than they are right now. I think Ukraine must utilize a mobile defense. They can't be stationary. They have to have flexibility and movement and maneuver inherent in their defense, because this allows them to attrit and destroy Russian capabilities in depth, right? And you do this through planned counterattacks, right? And this is something we really haven't seen Ukraine do a lot of yet, is a deliberate counterattack. So Ukraine must start to develop offensive capability, because from a purely defensive standpoint, they're not going to win, right? They have to have the offensive component to defeat Russia, right? Purely defensive, you're going to have lines that just move a little bit in either direction, all right? The counterattack is what's going to actually drive through and destroy Russian units, all right? So without a counter, the defense is not going to destroy, all right? And Ukraine needs to destroy Russia, all right? So they have to begin developing the offensive component of the defense, which is we call a counterattack, right? I don't think they can do this by fighting entire Russian, large units. They have to fight them piece by piece. They have to isolate and attack smaller Russian formations, because Russia's not synchronized. And Russia doesn't have a good grasp on what Ukraine's doing. They don't have a good understanding of Ukraine's terrain. So this affords Ukraine an opportunity to isolate and destroy Russian units piece by piece, which fits in perfectly with the mobile defense. All right, and I wrote in parentheses there, like, this is reminiscent of Third Battle of Kharkiv by German Army Group South during World War II. Right, because German Army Group South really started messing up the Russians in Kharkiv by fighting a mobile defense with various counterattacks. And then Hitler came in and said, no, we're going to dig trenches. And then that allowed Russia to flip the tide and destroyed the German army in Ukraine. Ukraine needs to start using their deep attack capabilities. They're not going to launch these as far in depth as Russia needs to, but they need to focus these deep strike capabilities on Russian logistics. Russia's already shown the world that they are awful in sustaining their combat forces. So reducing their logistics capability will have a tremendous impact on Russia's military apparatus. Right, so that's where Ukraine really needs to get in on. Right, and then Ukraine also needs to synchronize the echelon their indirect fires. It's not been synchronized as part of a plan. It's been a little too autonomous, and artillery needs to, rocket and cannon needs to be able to support ground movement and maneuver. Right, so when your indirect fires and your direct fire weapon systems are working together, it's a very, very potent capability, right? Because if I'm a Russian and I have 152 millimeter high explosive rounds landing on me, air bursting, and I have direct fire weapon systems shooting at me, where do I focus, right? This is an incredibly difficult situation to fight from. But if you're just firing at me with direct fire weapon systems, well, we're toe to toe, right? If you've thrown this in on top of me, you've added complexity and confusion and increased my risk, right? So, Ukraine's indirect fire capabilities need to be more closely tied to their maneuver plan. I mentioned already, don't allow forces to get isolated. But maintain tactical and operational flexibility. Ukraine does need to centralize some control to achieve synchronization. Ukraine's control is a little too desynchronized right now, I think. So we need to tighten that up for Ukraine and really allow us to mask the effects of fixed wing, rotary wing, rocket cannon, and ground movement and maneuver. I think Ukraine's done a pretty good job so far of avoiding tank-on-tank conventional battle. If you try to go toe-to-toe, it's going to be difficult. Russia's got they got the same weapon systems, but by achieving isolating Russian units and achieving a piecemeal attack, you're tipping the scales to your side. I do think ultimately Ukraine needs to alleviate pressure in Mariupol, and that has more to do with messaging than military necessity. It's kind of I will not leave a fallen comrade kind of thing. So eventually Ukraine does need to commit something to Mariupol and ensure that Azov and the Marine Brigade are being resupplied and allocated capabilities to allow them to survive and ultimately achieve some offensive capability. And finally, Ukraine must develop a method or a capability to conduct a strategic counterattack. Right, and this is like phase 3, right? So Ukraine has to start planning for phase 3 on organizing and planning for that offensive operation that destroys Russia's military capability in Ukraine, right? Because that's what really achieves a strategic aim for Ukraine. Right. Anything short of that is going to be some kind of negotiated settlement that ultimately is probably going to include Russia annexing a part of Ukraine. Right. So preventing that will require an offensive, strategic, deliberate counterattack to destroy Russian forces. Right. So we got to get to there, Ukraine, and I think that's your phase 3. Right. So this is from Germany the West Twitter feed. I'll just point out one little thing on here. All right, this is that little bulge I was talking about. This is what concerns me with Ukraine. Now, Grant, look, good combat power in here. 6 brigades. All right. My concern would be Russia pinching these brigades off, right? And that would allow them, complete envelopment and destroy those Ukrainian units. So that's something Ukraine cannot allow to happen, right? They have to maintain and don't allow Russia to close off that little salient there, right? Because that would not be good, right? And I put on city names in big letters on here so I can see what the heck's going on, and so I have understanding of the terrain, right? Right, but you see here, Sumy, Kiev back here, all right, but Kharkiv, Izium, Luhansk, Donetsk, Mariupol, Melitopol, all right, Kherson, Mykolaiv, that's right where the preponderance of Russian combat power is now, right? So there's my follow-up to yesterday's Borderlands cast. Just wanted to flip and kind of reinforce some of the things we said yesterday and expand upon them with what I'm thinking, what I'm looking at, if I were an advisor to the Russians or to the Ukrainians, where I would focus my advice to them. So hope it helps. Further the understanding of the military side of this. As always, I might be wrong. I don't think I am. I think I'm pretty close. But yeah, that's just the things I'm thinking right now. So take care. Enjoy your weekend.